You may be seated. In the summer of 2024, St. Mary's Cathedral in Linz, Austria, displayed a sculpture by a woman named Esther Strauss. The piece, entitled The Crowning, showed Mary, the mother of Jesus, with a haloed head, sitting spread-legged on a rock in the process of giving birth. The artist explained that the piece was meant to realistically convey what the birth of Jesus might have actually looked like inside of a stable in first century Bethlehem. The sculpture viscerally conveys Mary's vulnerability, but also her power. So here's a picture of that sculpture. Not surprisingly, the art evoked a range of reactions from appreciative to angry. One Catholic cardinal condemned the piece, arguing that, quote, "If a pictorial representation of the birth of Jesus causes offense among the faithful and division in the church, the aim of Christian art has been missed." 3 weeks later, vandals broke into the church and destroyed the statue, beheading Mary. Why were some Christians angry, afraid, or uncomfortable with Strauss's depiction? I have a few guesses. Throughout Christian history, most church-authorized depictions of Mary were completed by male artists and vetted by male clergy, which means that powerful men brought their own assumptions and biases to their presentations of Mary. Based on a survey of Mary paintings in historic religious art, this bias sometimes has included discomfort with the visibility of women's bodies. Most of these depictions only show Jesus and Mary hours or days after birth. You know, she's holding a cooing and angelic Christ child. She's almost always looking serene and calm, and her body is certainly all covered in clothing. In a similar vein, you can tell that the Gospel of Matthew was written by a man because it devotes only one sentence to the birth itself, right? 5 words, "She gave birth to a son." But if you've ever given birth or witnessed a birth, you will know that the process can be more agonizing, messy, smelly, beautiful, shocking than Matthew's single sentence conveys. In fact, I was tempted not to show you the piece of art at all. I worried that it might make people uncomfortable, maybe offend someone in the pews. And if you feel any of those things, that's okay. I want to invite us to gently get curious about that and maybe pray through it. What is it about this image that brings something up for me? Maybe you can dialogue with God about that. I decided to show us this image despite the risk of shocking someone. I did this because we often received a sanitized version of Christmas, a version which hides the most human and relatable elements of this story. This image punches through that facade. It announces the scandal of the incarnation. It says, God took on all of it, every experience that's part of being human. Because when we sanitize Mary and Joseph and Jesus and try to hide their bodied reality, it creates shame about our own bodied reality. It implies that we need to sanitize our lives. When we grow up around stories of plastic holy people without hearing about their real suffering, it makes us think we are alone in our own suffering. We think I'm suffering, but if Mary never suffered, there must be something wrong with me. What might it look like for us to recover a sense of the humanness of our spiritual ancestors? I want to remind us of a few historical facts. In Jesus' time, in first century Palestine, 1 out of every 2 children died in childbirth. 1 out of every 2 children experienced the death of a parent in their childhood. About 90% of that population were incredibly poor. So they worked as day laborers with no access to health care, no financial savings of any kind, 90% of people. So if you got pregnant and you didn't have a supportive family, or if you got sick, or if you were born with a disability and you couldn't work, then you became a beggar at the gates. All this is to say, Mary and Joseph and Jesus grew up in brutal social conditions. They were deeply acquainted with suffering. And sometimes we forget that the two most important characters in the New Testament lived with chronic illnesses. The Apostle Paul tells us in his letter to the Corinthians that he lived daily with a thorn in his side that God would not remove. And Jesus himself, after the resurrection, bore scars from his experience of violence at the hands of Roman soldiers. Maybe the resurrected Jesus walked with a limp. Maybe he needed to use a cane. Maybe he was not physically capable of walking upstairs. Maybe the disciples had to carry the resurrected Jesus upstairs. We don't know. In today's language, we could reasonably say that both Paul and Jesus were people with disabilities. And if Jesus had a disability, that means we worship a disabled God. I was diagnosed with a chronic illness when I was 18 years old, and I've lived with that illness for half of my life, 18 more years. Just as we are tempted to sanitize Mary's bodied experience, I'm aware of the ways that I want to sanitize my bodied experience. I'm tempted to mask my weakness so you don't see it. I want to externally convey strength and reliability, vigor and competency, but often that's just not true. I have moments where I think I hate my body. I have moments where I'm so mad at my body for getting in the way of my life. I have moments where I'm so mad at God. Why would God give me a body that doesn't seem to work? A body that gets in the way when I'm trying to be a good friend, a good leader, a good partner, a good parent. Why can't my body be normal, I sometimes think in frustration. And I believe that God can handle these thoughts, right? There's space for those thoughts. But also, I'm continually learning how to forgive my body, how to thank my body for doing the best that it can to keep me safe, how to practice gratitude for my body, how to be in awe of all that my body does. The priest Barbara Brown Taylor suggests that from time to time we take off all of our clothes and pray naked in front of a mirror. I said that Strauss's image of Mary is shocking, but it might just be the best news in the world. It might be the good news for us, the gospel. Mary is screaming. Mary is bleeding. Her story reminds us that there is no normal life void of struggle, which means that we can stop expecting that for ourselves. As Dietrich Bonhoeffer explained, he said, God is weak and powerless in the world, and that is exactly the way in which he can be with us and help us. Perhaps the only guarantee is that living in bodies we will feel pain. There is no normal body type. There is no normal weight. There is no normal mental health status. See, sometimes Christianity gets perverted and people say that Jesus came to cure us, to make us normal, to fit into some abstract ideal. When really, Jesus came to show us that there is no normal, that he has joined us in the unique, painful, pleasurable experience of living inside a vulnerable body. We do not need to be afraid of whatever we are experiencing this morning. We do not need to be ashamed of whatever we are experiencing this morning. Jesus has joined us in all of it. Chemotherapy, God with us. Infertility, God with us. Dementia, God with us. Diabetes, God with us. Feces, blood, vaginal tearing, umbilical cords, God with us. Mary, Joseph, Paul, Jesus, they lived with these daily anxieties. They lived with these daily sufferings. And the gospel story makes this critical pronouncement. Their suffering did not disqualify them from being part of God's redeeming work. And so the good news for us is this: our struggles and our suffering do not disqualify us from being part of God's redeeming work. We are God's beloved children. We're vulnerable and strong. We are God's messengers of joy. And so when we say to God, "Here I am," we get to co-labor with God to bring Christ into the world again. May it be so. Amen.